Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is the Wednesday edition of Point of View, and this blockbuster book that is coming out raises some very good questions about the generals, and so we will get into that first. Of course, last night the recall election went pretty much as we expected, but before we see that off in our rear view mirror, it is worth mentioning that there is a great deal of evidence of voter fraud. Now, a lot of people are arguing, well, so what? It doesn't affect the outcome because the difference in vote totals is so huge that nobody can, I think, with any straight face, argue that this was completely an attempt to overturn an election or to manipulate it. But there was voter fraud. It's worth mentioning. And I come back to one of the comments that we've heard from Senator Brian Hughes, who is the author of this particular piece of legislation in Texas about voter integrity. When people would say, well, there's no example of widespread voter fraud, Senator Hughes used to say, well, how much fraud is acceptable to you? And again, recognizing that there is evidence of fraud this time in California, no surprise, but can we learn some lessons? And I posted a piece that we will get to a little bit later. Then we'll get into a couple other topics on the table in the first hour. The second hour is devoted entirely to my interview with Chelsey Youman. Chelsey, of course, is oftentimes sitting in this chair during a Millennial Roundtable. We thought we would reverse it and let me ask her some questions. We have posted her piece that came out a while ago, Why Planned Parenthood is Wrong About Texas Heartbeat Bill. Also, another one we've posted about how Texas is spending $100 million to help pregnant moms while it protects babies from abortion. We also might get into the actions of the Department of Justice, even a commentary I did on Monday about that. So we'll kind of get all the pro-life issues out in the second hour. And of course, either hour, we welcome your phone calls at 1-800-351-1212. If by chance you receive emails from me in terms of what is my commentary, you will notice that my commentary today is about the generals. Now, I don't necessarily plan these because we record these a week ahead of time. I've had people say, well, why do you record them a week ahead of time? Well, first of all, I try to make it easier on the engineer who has to clean up any mistakes I make, but also so many of the various organizations and networks that carry this would like to have all of them by that Friday before. So whether they want to put them up on satellite and Moody Broadcasting, they want to put it to an FTP site for American Family Radio, for Bot Radio Network, whatever it might be, or even our own. Certainly, we produce these pretty early, and I did not know that there was going to be a release from this blockbuster book about the generals, because my commentary has to do primarily with all the things that some of these generals have been saying, and I will get into that in just a few minutes because I really want to focus on this new book. This is written, again, by Bob Woodward, Robert Costas, called Peril. Now, the book goes into all sorts of reasons why people were concerned about the Trump administration. You expected those kind of books, didn't you? What has been so interesting is the revelation that comes with the fact that the general of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mark Milley, actually took the time to go and contact China without any kind of permission and without any kind of oversight. And the justification he made is that we were concerned about kind of the mental state or even the mental decline of of course, Donald Trump. But if you think about this, I was jumping ahead of myself. I was going to say, if you're thinking that had mental decline, I think what we are dealing with right now with the current president is definitely mental decline. So does that mean that any general can talk to China, Russia, any other potential enemy because you are concerned about the mental decline of the current president? If it was good for Trump, why is it not good for Biden? If this had been done, for example, when Barack Obama was president, or we find out later it's being done while the president is actually in mental decline right now, Joe Biden, then you can see where we get to some of those difficulties. But anyway, the first article that we have posted, actually it's the second article, if we did not already have enough reasons to believe that General Mark Milley has no business serving as chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff, today's blockbuster story in the Washington Post, excerpted from, of course, Bob Woodward's and Robert Costa's book Peril, should confirm this. Any Congress worthy of the name in a democracy would open an investigation of General Milley and push for his removal. Any president who took his oath seriously would fire him immediately. Again, let me quote from the book. Of course, this is going to increase the sales of the book dramatically, but again, this is a direct quote from the book. Twice in the final months of the Trump administration, the country's top military officer was so fearful that the president's actions might spark a war with China that he moved urgently to avert armed conflict. In a pair of secret phone calls, General Mark Milley, the chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff, assured his Chinese counterpart, of the People's Liberation Army that the United States would not strike. One call took place October 30th, another one on January 8th. And if that's not enough, he did actually spend some time communicating all of this to the House Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, which I guess you could say might be justified since she's so theoretically third in the chain of command, but it is a good illustration of this. By the way, he also called the admiral overseeing the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command and recommended postponing any kind of military exercises. And so it goes into some detail into the fact that he's quite willing to admit that he did this. And of course, the reason for that is because he's, first of all, convinced that he has done the right thing. Second of all, he knows that any criticism he would receive probably would only come from conservative media, because there is no real sense in this book by Bob Woodward or by people that work at the Washington Post, New York Times, that this was anything that was untoward at all. And as a result, simply it reports it as is. At least the piece that I've posted here, though, by Don McLaughlin says there is no circumstance in which an American military officer should be conducting his own rogue foreign policy without informing the civilian leadership. That strikes directly at the heart of our democratic constitutional system, in which the elected president and Congress and the appointees who are chosen by the president and report to him make the major foreign policy decisions, and the military must carry them out. This is blatant. And it is a good example of the fact that this is a group of individuals that consider themselves to be elitist. And when they unfortunately had somebody that was not part of the club who became president or vice president, they simply said, we are going to, whether it's in the military, whether it's through the deep state, work as well as possible to prevent that individual from enacting the kind of policies that were actually supposed to be part of the Trump administration. Anyway, I wanted you to see this article. It will be a source of conversation, and yet I suspect we are going to hear lots of people arguing, well, we really couldn't trust the mental stability of Donald Trump back in December and January. Let me ask you a question. Do you trust the mental stability right now of the current president, Joe Biden? And many times the way to understand if something has gone the wrong direction is to flip it. And I can't even imagine a scenario by which, if this happened under the Biden administration, it wouldn't exactly be front page headlines and a call for maybe even a trial for treason. Nevertheless, we wanted to report it today here on Point of View. We have a lot more to cover. We'll do that right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
The last bastion of common sense and traditional values has been the military, but we're hearing some disturbing comments from several U.S. generals and others in the upper echelon of the military. One of the guests on my radio program suggested that military leaders might not advance above the rank of lieutenant colonel unless they embrace the new woke mindset of the Pentagon. That may or may not be true, but it might explain why we're hearing military leadership talking in ways we've never heard before. General Mark Milley is the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and apparently believes our biggest enemy isn't overseas but right here within the military. He promised to root out white supremacy within the ranks and wants to understand white rage by reading more about critical race theory. The withdrawal from Afghanistan has been a disaster, even if the White House and some in the media try to put a positive face on it. Yet on the day when 13 service members died, what was the communication from the military? Sergeant Major of the Army Michael Grinson sent out a tweet reminding Americans that diversity is our strength. This virtue signaling was the military's effort to commemorate Women's Equality Day. By contrast, a Marine lieutenant colonel was relieved of his command for his video criticizing military leaders for the Afghanistan withdrawal. That would be some of the same top brass that constantly criticized former President Donald Trump for 4 years with impunity. General Michael Hayden compared Trump's border facilities to Nazi death camps, and more recently, the retired general retweeted a suggestion that unvaccinated Trump supporters should be put on planes back to Afghanistan. These are just a few unfortunate examples of the type of military leadership we have today. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Go deeper on topics like you just heard by visiting pointofview.net. That's pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes on this issue of the military, and then in this segment we'll get into the issue of voter fraud. But I thought I'd just continue this for a minute as we talk about the military. My commentary today, and those of you listening online just heard it, but the rest of you will either receive it in your inbox or you certainly can go to the website pointofview.net. And I point out in this commentary I wrote a week ago that really kind of the last bastion of common sense and even traditional values has been the military. It was the one particular area of the government that Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton and others kind of forced against it because even though they wanted to actually exercise certain kinds of military actions, they weren't always thrilled with who was in positions of leadership. And that, of course, has changed dramatically now because we're getting all sorts of really disturbing comments from some of the generals and people in the upper echelon of the military. And just the other day, we had a guest on my program that suggested that it's quite possible that military leaders might not even advance above the rank of lieutenant colonel unless they embrace this kind of new woke mindset that seems to be circulating in the Pentagon. Again, that may or may not be true, but it might explain some of the things we're hearing, and it certainly would explain some of the conversations that we've had here on Point of View. You know that Kelly Shackelford is oftentimes with us on Friday. He will be with us this Friday along with Penna Dexter. But sometimes we bring in Michael Berry, who's part of the military division of First Liberty. And the conversations we've oftentimes had with Michael Berry are the fact that there have been some real, if you will, assaults on the
religious liberty of people in the military, starting first with the chaplains, but also going into the rank and file. And I thought, just as a real quick comment, I might mention for those of you that are in the military, or you have a loved one in the military that might be struggling with some edict coming down or something that is preventing them from having a Bible or a religious symbol, or maybe some kind of attack on a chaplain or something of that nature. First Liberty, if you go to firstliberty.org and go to the military section, they have a religious liberty protection kit for the U.S. military, how service members and chaplains can exercise their legal rights. And I just thought I might mention that that actually exists and is something that you should be aware of, because, again, we thank those of you that have served in the military. We thank those of you maybe listening today that are actually serving right now in the military. But let's, if we can, look for just a minute, as I mentioned in this commentary, about some of the comments. Just a minute ago, of course, we talked about General Mark Milley, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, apparently believes, as far as we can tell, that maybe the biggest enemy is not overseas, not the ones he talked to on the phone on a couple of occasions, but actually the biggest enemy is within the military. He's the one that talked about rooting out white supremacy. He wants to understand white rage, and so as a result was going to be reading different books on critical race theory. Okay, well, when you look at that, you can also recognize that we have been in the midst of what most people would think would be a military debacle. That has been the botched withdrawal of civilians and troops from Afghanistan. And yet, even on the day in which you had 13 service members killed in a suicide bombing, what did you have as communication from the military that day? Well, that would have been Sergeant Major of Army Michael Grinson, who set out a tweet reminding Americans that diversity is our strength, which I think is a good example of just virtue signaling as they were trying to commemorate Women's Equality Day. No, diversity may not be your strength. In some cases, as we've talked about with some of our guests, it could be your weakness, because when you lower the standards, when you begin to say, we want to try to have more individuals with different abilities, different ethnic backgrounds, different religious backgrounds, different sexual backgrounds, different sexual orientations, and your first issue is trying to get a diversity rather than have the most effective fighting unit, then I think you are going to run into some very significant problems in the near future. Now, again, I tend to believe that there are individuals, certainly, that whether they're male or female, whether they have certain kinds of orientations or not, are equipped to actually be part of the best fighting force. So I'm not saying that. What I am saying, though, is when the focus is on diversity rather than on ability, sometimes ability gets watered down, and we've seen many examples of that. And if you need more examples, look at some of the commentaries we've posted, and as a matter of fact, some of the ones that Penna Dexter has posted over those years. Let's also recognize that given the current climate there in the Pentagon, criticizing your superiors is not allowed. Now, I recognize that that is not something we can allow in the military chain of command, but an individual, for example, a Marine lieutenant colonel, was relieved of his command simply because he had a video that criticized the withdrawal, and that was enough for him to actually be removed from his post. And yet the people that were criticizing him for his criticism were the same top brass, which we've talked about already, that oftentimes, quite frequently, criticized Donald Trump. General Michael Hayden, when he was the general, criticized and compared Trump's border facilities to Nazi death camps. And then after he retired, the retired general retweeted a suggestion that unvaccinated Trump supporters should be put on planes back to Afghanistan. Those are just a few of the examples, but I think it illustrates again that something is very different in the military, and one of the reasons why I wrote my commentary and wanted you to have a chance to read it, send it out, and see what kind of comments maybe are generated from other people that might see it on Facebook or Twitter who serve in the military and maybe even have other stories of what has happened to them in their unit. Just before we take a break, though, let me mention that, of course, we had the recall election in California. No real surprise there. But one of the quotes that I have from this first article by John Lott, who's been on the program with us many times before and really does a great job with statistical analysis. He starts out with this quote: "Absentee ballots remain the largest source of potential voter fraud." I love what he says. This quote doesn't come from the Republican gubernatorial candidate Larry Elder. It comes really from the bipartisan report of the Commission of Federal Election Reform, which was chaired by former President Jimmy Carter and former Secretary of State James Baker. And that has been something that we've documented for many years. And again, whether Democrat or Republican, they recognize the potential danger with absentee ballots. Then he gives us some of the examples, one that I mentioned 2 days ago, and that is the police found 300 recall ballots and multiple California driver's license in a felon's car in Torrance, California. Okay, there's a problem. San Fernando Valley, I talked about this. Officials were telling Republican voters that they'd already voted when they hadn't voted. And again, these problems seem to happen more and more. Now, again, they were given provisional ballots, probably wouldn't have made any difference, but it illustrates, again, the real concern. And deeper into the article, John Lott says the Carter-Baker report argued that one of the biggest problems with absentee voting was the difficulty in detecting fraud. They actually said citizens who vote at home, at nursing homes, at the workplace, or in church are more susceptible to pressure, overt and subtle, and to intimidation. Vote buying schemes are far more difficult to detect when citizens vote by mail. So they've been very concerned about that as well. And this, of course, illustrates exactly why in places like Texas and Georgia, there have been attempts to deal with this whole issue of voter integrity. The most recent Rasmussen poll, you'll find this on the second page, shows that 79% of likely voters think that it is very important to prevent cheating in elections. Another 11% think it is somewhat important. And if you look at this, it is very interesting because it doesn't matter whether you're white or black. 72% of black likely voters support photo IDs. So do 79% of those who are neither white or black. And of course, if you then start talking about this issue of absentee voting, we so often hear from many of the progressives, well, we need to be like Europe. Oh, yeah? 74% of European countries have banned absentee voting for citizens who reside there domestically. Another 21% require government-issued IDs for absentee voting. So if we really want to be like Europe, they recognize the danger, and it illustrates, again, the fact that whenever we have one of these elections, there is fraud. The argument you're going to hear over the next couple of days is, if and there was a little bit of fraud, what's the difference? Because after all, it didn't really affect the outcome. Gavin Newsom will still continue to serve as governor. And I come back to the question that Senator Brian Hughes asked on this program a while back, and that is, how much fraud is acceptable to you? Because it is a good question that needs to be asked in every election, and it's one that should have been asked even in this recall election. We'll ask it, even if others won't. Let's take a break. We have a lot more to cover. We will do that right after this.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @PointOfViewRTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook. Point of View RTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Next hour, we're going to have Chelsey with us, and we'll be talking about her article, Why Planned Parenthood is Wrong About Texas Heartbeat Bill. Also, how Texas is spending millions and millions of dollars to help pregnant women, and also how the Justice Department is bringing suit, what might happen there. And we'll look ahead to this particular case out of Mississippi that's gone to the Supreme Court, what that might mean for the future of Roe versus Wade. So all all of that taking place about a half an hour. We certainly do welcome your phone calls, questions, and comments then. One of the other articles I've posted is by Stephen Moore, who's been on the program with us before. Americans should be working hard, not hardly working. And it really relates to a couple of things. First of all, as I have said before, one of the great benefits of listening to Point of View and actually supporting Point of View, next week will be our Truth Team Week. We do provide these booklets. This one I'm holding up right now, we'll be sending out to you shortly on money. I just finished writing one that deals with work, and it relates to both of the topics that this particular article addresses, because the Labor Department reported this week that there are now a record number of jobs opening. This would be 10.9 million jobs which are open. To put that in perspective, that's twice the size of the entire workforce in Ohio, the Buckeye State. So I think it's pretty interesting to see we're talking about 10 million open jobs. So that comes from the Labor Department. At the same time, they counted at least 8 million unemployed Americans. So again, Stephen Moore asked, I think, a legitimate question. What in the world is going on here? Why aren't the 8 million workers supposedly, allegedly looking for a job filling any of those 10 million open jobs? Could it be, he says, they aren't working or looking very hard? Now, again, whenever we get into this, people say, you're saying these people are lazy. Well, I mean, I recognize some people are lazy, but I think what it is some people are rational. And I want to give you the numbers for just a minute to see why there is, I think, some rational reasons, apart from also just wanting to stay home, for why many people don't necessarily feel that they should go out and be looking for a job. For example, Stephen Moore puts it this way: government welfare policies are clearly keeping millions of Americans from taking jobs. Even though there are millions of retail and restaurant jobs open, these industries lost employment in August. Same for construction, a loss of jobs even though nearly every construction company in America is desperate for workers. The same is true for unfilled warehousing and manufacturing, trucking, engineering, and business services jobs. These, he says, are not dead-end jobs or even minimum wage jobs in most cases. Open factory and truck driver jobs pay $50,000 to $100,000 a year with benefits. Did you see the other day just the number of workers Amazon is looking for? And nobody considers anybody who's working, even in a warehouse in Amazon, working for minimum wage, believe me. So, why is this the case? Here's the numbers. Again, some of you like to take notes. Here's a good place to take notes. In case you wonder where this comes from, I always get these questions off air. This comes from an economist at the University of Chicago. His name is Casey Mulligan. We've quoted him before. He has found that when counting all government benefits, okay, so we're counting everything that you can get, and this could be WIC, and it could be unemployment, it could be all sorts of other things. A family of four in high welfare benefit states, we'll use New York and Connecticut. I've lived in Connecticut. I travel to New York every year. With two unemployed parents could receive, are you ready for this number? Okay, so we're talking about a family of four, welfare benefits, not only from the federal government, but then what you would get, say, in New York and Connecticut, they would receive up to $100,000 in government benefits. Not making this up. If you want to see this, it is our third article. Lots of times people say, well, they don't pay enough. That's just, again, an understanding that when you add all those benefits together, you would have to be making $100,000, or both mom and dad would have to be working at jobs that pay $50,000 to even come close to that. And then you have the taxes on top of that. I need to go back and look at that and see whether he accounted for the taxes that you would have to, because sometimes we also say that even if you made $100,000, you still wouldn't be better off because you'd be paying at a very high tax rate. But anyway, that is the case. So again, Stephen Moore asked a very good question. Why work? Well, in some cases, workers would actually see a cut in their income if they return to their jobs. Now, again, I'm going to quote from somebody else, and this is Larry Kudlow. Now, I've had very high respect for Larry Kudlow. It's been decades since we've had him on, and probably even less likely now because a lot of people say, well, he's tainted because he actually worked as an economic advisor for Donald Trump. But okay, I still think that he brings a lot to the table. And he noted that President Joe Biden and the Democrats in Congress have done away with the successful bipartisan welfare reforms of the 1990s. Remember, those were implemented originally by the Speaker of the House back then, that was Newt Gingrich, and eventually and somewhat reluctantly signed by President Bill Clinton. Marvin Olasky, who we're going to talk about a little bit later in the next hour, wrote a book on the tragedy of American compassion and suggested that if anything, we should provide benefits for people that at least look like they're trying to go to work. And there were limits on how many benefits would be paid. That was 26 weeks, half a year. And then if you weren't actually trying to at least get sometimes either job training or seek a job, well, then guess what? You wouldn't receive some of the benefits. And all the hue and cry that came out actually turned out to be pretty good. Here's another problem, before I take a break, that are facing employers and workers. And that gets me into this book that we'll be mailing out to you shortly on money. And that is, matter of fact, also have a commentary next week coming out on inflation. And that is, inflation is running ahead of wages. Even if you take just what the government says is about 5% inflation, and I don't believe it because I know it is much higher because they use a specific basket of goods which has changed ever since the 1980s. But even if you say that is the case, even if the wages go up 4%, the cost of living, according to the government, goes up 5%, and I don't believe that. Does anybody seriously think that the house prices have gone up 5%? No, they've gone up 25 to 26%. Does anybody think that the cost of lumber has gone up 5%? No, it went up 200%. Now, that may be more of a supply shortage, but nevertheless, it illustrates again that the further you go down the road, the dollars in your wallet, the dollars in your pocketbook, the dollars in your savings account are going to be worth less in the future than they are today. They're worth less than they were in the past. And so that is another real issue as well because of the trillions of dollars of money printing that have actually taken place. The other part of this is as he points out, other victims is the fact that you have about 10 million people who operate small businesses. And the Bloomberg Research Group and news outfit reported that half of all small businesses are hiring and have multiple job openings. Some are even hiring workers that can't pass a drug test because they're so desperate for workers. And again, the argument from this administration, and in particular President Biden, is these businesses need to pay workers more. First of all, as he says, easier said than done, although I did see and documented in an article coming out that indeed what we're seeing is they were offering just the other day, can you believe this? Just to go for an interview at McDonald's, they would give you $50. Just to show up for the interview. And you'd get $50 even if you didn't end up working at McDonald's. This is how desperate this has become. And so the solution, drum roll, please. We need to pass that $3.5 trillion budget bill and the $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill, and that will be the solution to this problem. Actually, it will not. Again, you can read some of the booklets that we are making available and some of the articles we've posted, because what that really will do will fan the flames of inflation. It will put more dollars out there, and it will make it even more difficult, perhaps. There are some solutions, but that requires to stop the money printing and to maybe do tapering, which the Federal Reserve is not going to do, because every time they want to taper some of the buying of various securities, they have a taper tantrum on Wall Street. And so this is the hard reality that as you walk into grocery stores, as you walk into restaurants, and you walk into department stores, and you're looking for someone to help you, you're going to find that they are understaffed, because in some respects, it pays more not to work. And when you pay people not to work, I know this is only common sense, but when you pay people not to work, guess what happens? People don't work. And it isn't always because people are lazy, although there are lazy workers out there too. It's because they're making rational choices about the benefits they can receive by not working, and the difficulty that it would come to actually be involved in what some people have called the so-called dirty jobs. So let's take a break. We've got a few more things to cover, and we will do that right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, just for a few more minutes, and don't forget, we'll have Chelsey with us at the top of the hour. And I always like to end with something that might be a little bit more positive, and also I think we will actually end this segment by maybe encouraging you to pray for what's going on in Afghanistan. I want to give you an update on that. But here is something intriguing, and that is studies are now showing that both hybrid immunity and superhuman immunity are ways that our body actually has extra fighting power against COVID-19. I don't want to always talk about the virus, but there are a couple of things that I thought might mention. First of all, you might say, okay, what's hybrid immunity? Well, that's when somebody has had COVID-19 and the vaccine. It does suggest in some cases that the natural immunity looks at the entire virus. The vaccine immunity looks at the spike. Remember, we talked about that really what it's doing is creating an mRNA spike so that it would cause that. So the two together seems to be somewhat synergistic, although, as we've pointed out before, quite a number of individuals that have had COVID-19 and also were vaccinated still come down, but with less infection. So anyway, that's hybrid immunity. But I want to get to the other one, and that is superhuman immunity. Have I been watching the Avengers? What is this? No, it actually turns out that they have actually identified this. This comes from really just down the street, interestingly enough, from where we broadcast. Some people just genetically have a better immunity, as you might imagine, to COVID-19. This comes from the it's the North Texas Allergy and Asthma Associates. One of the immunologists there says there are some of us that have this super ability to be able to recover from infections, COVID being one of them, a little better than the general population. It's a rare phenomenon, but it's something I've seen in individuals that I've met over the years that say, I never get sick, Dr. Cooper of the Cooper Clinic, I don't think he's ever taken a sick day that I know of in the time that most of us have known him. But anyway, he says, this now comes from TCU's chair of internal medicine. He says it's a descriptive term for an individual to generate very high amounts of neutralizing antibodies. And some of the studies show that some people may have hit what you might call the genetic jackpot, meaning their bodies can develop very high levels of antibodies that neutralize the virus. They're also capable of fighting off not only the current COVID-19, but even the future variants. Now, of course, there's no clinical test to determine if you're one of those Avengers or superhuman immunity people, but other than a regular antibody test to assess your general immunity. But that is at least something to mention, that it gets us back to the fact that when we have some people saying everybody needs to be vaccinated, well, not necessarily, because some people have superhuman immunity. And that was a story that came out today, and thought you'd like to know about that. Let's also talk about the fact that there are a number of fake stories out about COVID-19. No surprise there. Matt Vesta put it this way. He says, the latest round of fake news stories, of course, this one you may have heard about. It was repeated in a number of different venues, but I think the first report came from our friends at NPR, National Public Radio. If you've not seen the story, it's one of those ones where, again, it reminded me last week, remember we talked about the story out of Oklahoma, ivermectin, that people were taking this cow treatment, and then they were overloading the hospitals, and people couldn't get in. People with gunshot wounds couldn't get in because the hospital supposedly was overwhelmed by the people taking this cattle treatment, which, of course, is not true on every level. But this story is where Ray Demonia, 73 years of age, actually went to one hospital after another hospital after another hospital. He visited 43 hospitals and was turned away. And ultimately, what killed him was not COVID, but a heart ailment. And so the story goes into this idea of going to the emergency staff in 3 states. And again, the states, well, since he's from Mississippi, Alabama, I assume those are the 2. I don't know what the other one was. And that he just kept getting set aside. And this, of course, is a great example of the fact that we are callous and we would turn away an individual that has COVID. And, of course, as Matt Vesta points out, getting this story out without even being able to check it, because there is very good evidence that there was not any kind of fact-checking other than a spokesperson for the Regional Medical Center in Coleman who declined to give any specifics about the case, where he ended up, and he was actually transferred because they had a higher level of specialized care. This whole idea, the man died after being turned away from 43 ICUs at capacity due to COVID, is a nice story, and it certainly tugs on your heartstrings, and there is probably zero evidence that it is true. And so, again, you can read more about that. There are some people that have been doing the fact-checking on all of that. But it illustrates, again, that it illustrates the point I've made before about confirmation bias. If I'm convinced that these southern hospitals are overloaded because they are the ones that have lots of unvaccinated people, which, by the way, doesn't necessarily turn out to be the case, then I'm just going to run with the story, even though the facts and just sort of common sense would suggest that maybe that's not true. And another good reason for you to exercise a level of discernment about anything you see, read, or hear. But as we come to the end here, I do want to once again encourage you to pray for those in Afghanistan. This particular story comes from Samuel Sheffield, in which he talks about the fact that he was watching, of course, what has been happening in Afghanistan, and then was connected by a friend who needed help getting an Afghan colleague and his family out of Afghanistan. He says, managed to get them out before the U.S. military forces evacuated the Air Force base, well, actually the airport in Kabul. But during the effort to get the first family out, he said, I tapped into a vast network of individuals and groups trying to liberate people trapped in Afghanistan. And I want to continue to remind you of the fact that there are still people there that need to get out. And those who are trying to get out now are trying to flee across the border. That's not good, because if you look at a map of Afghanistan, you don't want to go west, that's Iran. Many times they go east, and that's Pakistan, but more often they tend to go north to Tajikistan. Matter of fact, there's so many going to Tajikistan. If you are not familiar with this, the Biden administration is now helping them actually solidify their border, their southern border. I'm not making this up. We're ignoring our own southern border here in the United States, and we're actually helping those with their border. But even as individuals are trying to flee, as he points out here, to Uzbekistan or Tajikistan, some are turned away by the Taliban, some are imprisoned, some, as they try to cross the border, are shot or killed by Pakistani, Uzbek, or Tajik soldiers. Also, Russia has troops in both Uzbekistan and Tajikistan and has started a 3-day military exercise in response to Afghanistan's deterioration. In one border crossing to Pakistan is still wide open on both sides, but the catch, Taliban fighters actually live on the Pakistan side. They raise their families, enjoy their freedom, and then travel back and forth to Afghanistan. So border crossings are not only dangerous, but there are oftentimes different checkpoints and even opportunistic criminals that have been trying as possible to do what they can to stop this. And so there are quite a number of those individuals that right now are trying to find some way to get out of Afghanistan. There have been some covert operations, which I've alluded to as well, but we encourage you to pray for our president, our vice president, chief of staffs, and all sorts of other individuals, but also pray for those behind the Taliban curtain and pray for them as well. We sent out a prayer alert about that. We may send out another one, but I would certainly want to end this hour by encouraging you to pray about what's going on in Afghanistan. Next hour, we're going to encourage you to pray about life and abortion. All that coming up right after this.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
This hour, as I've already been saying, we are going to have Chelsey with us, and so often, of course, you hear her as the host of the Millennial Roundtable, but we thought we would turn it around today because, first of all, I know some of you have some questions about the Texas Heartbeat Bill. We've posted a very good piece that she had come out in August about why Planned Parenthood is wrong about the Texas Heartbeat Bill. Have another one here about Texas spends $100 million to help pregnant moms while it protects babies from abortion. Also have one that I'll get to a little bit later because it's a conversation I had just the other day with John Stonestreet about his piece by Marvin Olasky, which we'll call Aristotle and Abortion. And, of course, we have the Department of Justice convinced that they have to sue the state of Texas over this. So we could focus a lot of time just on the heartbeat bill, but also we want to recognize that coming up are the oral arguments before the Supreme Court in a case known as Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization. It's one of the Mississippi pro-life bills, and that might actually change the whole law of Roe versus Wade. So we have a lot to cover, and along the way, if you would like to join the conversation, feel free to give us a call, 1-800-351-1212. Chelsey doesn't need much introduction, but again, she is the Texas State Director, also the National Legislative Advisor for Human Coalition, a graduate in law from Southern Methodist University, used to work with First Liberty, and of course now is with the Human Coalition there in Austin, Texas. So Chelsey, thank you for joining us today.
Well, it's such an honor to be here, Kerby. I love that you are doing the interviewing today.
Well, I'll see if I can do a good enough job as you do all the time with your guests. But first of all, let's focus on a piece that came out in August. And I posted it because some may have read it back then because it appeared in National Review. It was very good. But it has to do with why Planned Parenthood is wrong about the heartbeat bill. Because back then we were talking about a bill that then became law. You know, we have more than a dozen states that have passed a heartbeat bill, but they haven't become the law of the state. In this case, in Texas, it did. So talk about kind of the unique nature of the bill, because it is actually the law, at least at the moment, isn't it?
Yes, it certainly is. Texas was the first state to successfully enact a heartbeat bill. 13 states have tried, 13 states have failed, and Texas learned from those other states who went before and really used some unique aspects of the law that already exist to find ways to prevent abortion providers from winning in a challenge against the lawsuit. And I'm really proud that we supported the bill. There's lots of brilliant attorneys behind the bill, but it really is an incredible success that the bill's even been enacted. So hopefully those procedural mechanisms continue to work, and we'll continue to see lives saved every day.
In your article, you point out that in the state of Texas, 85% of abortions are performed during this stage of development because heartbeats usually detected between the 5th week and the 8th week of pregnancy. So when some people are saying this won't affect very many abortions, it actually affects a very significant number, doesn't it?
Yes, we estimate between about 100 to 150 children a day in the womb would be saved by this bill. Now, of course, we know that women might go out of state or seek abortion elsewhere, but our hope in Texas really is to provide an abortion-free state and environment, which, of course, as you know, includes Texas's significant and unprecedented infrastructure in place to serve pregnant women. They have $100 million in A2A, the Alternatives to Abortion program, expanded Medicaid access for postpartum care. So Texas is really looking at the whole picture when they're looking to save lives.
By the way, I will get to that in just a minute about the kind of money that's being spent to help pregnant moms, because I think it sets aside this idea that, well, you only care about the baby, you don't care about the mom. Of course, we had our friends from Counsel for Life last Wednesday in studio here talking about some of those myths. But let me just put on your legal hat for just a minute and explain this, because it is something that people have said, well, why did Texas actually have a bill that became law when, after all, Planned Parenthood, of course, filed suit, and others? They wanted an emergency action from the Supreme Court, and yet the Supreme Court ruled 5-4. No, we don't have to act on this because essentially you don't have standing, because anyone that would actually be enforcing that is not part of the state of Texas. And so explain the nature of this, because it's fairly unique and one of the reasons why this bill became law.
Yes. I love when anyone asks me to put on my lawyer hat, so you guys stick with me. But the 13 states I mentioned that passed heartbeat bills, those are bills, of course, just like ours, that prohibit abortion on a child in the womb with a heartbeat. That means that's an illegal abortion. But most abortion laws and laws that are passed require state enforcement of that bill. For instance, the state or government would have been charged with prosecuting or bringing lawsuits against abortion providers in those states. Texas learned our lessons from those states failing and said, we have a unique landscape here in Texas because we have local DAs who have publicly signed letters saying, your local elected officials, we will never enforce abortion regulations in our state. You have abortion providers who uniquely sue on behalf of clients, not themselves, for their rights. So like this third-party lawsuit loophole that abortion providers get, they get every exemption under the law. And because of that, and the fact that the federal courts have essentially removed the ability to regulate abortion from legislatures, Texas said, all right, what we're going to do is remove this from the federal courts as best as possible and allow our private citizens to be the ones to enforce this bill. So explicitly within SB 8, the act states no government official in the state of Texas is ever allowed to enforce this bill between now and Kingdom Come. Instead, we're going to put it on private citizens to bring private lawsuits in state court against abortion providers who willfully and knowingly conduct illegal abortions on children with heartbeats in the womb.
And so, again, because you don't have a state actor doing that, to say that we want an injunction to prevent state actors from doing that, the Supreme Court, at least 5-4, said, you don't have any basis here to deal with this because no lawsuit has been brought and no state actor has actually been involved in the process. So I thought it was interesting. Now, I'll be the first to admit that David French, who's been on the program with us, even in studio, sometimes it's not quite up to snuff or quite up the way he would have done that. So I recognize that not everybody's on board, but it is, I think, very intriguing to actually see how this has been able to play itself out and kept the Supreme Court from jumping in and really even causing a federal court from jumping in. When we come back from the break, I want to take on this issue of, okay, what about the heart or the brain or some other things, because we recognize that the cessation of a heartbeat defines death usually. So could not the onset of a heartbeat define life? Now some are saying, well, maybe we should use brains, but think about this. The brain isn't fully developed till way after the baby is born. So what about some of those arguments? And that also leads kind of interestingly into this piece about Aristotle and abortion. It might surprise you to find out that even back in those times with the Greeks, they understood that they sort of thought life maybe started at the 6th week. So we'll get into some of those conversations right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
The last bastion of common sense and traditional values has been the military, but we're hearing some disturbing comments from several U.S. generals and others in the upper echelon of the military. One of the guests on my radio program suggested that military leaders might not advance above the rank of lieutenant colonel unless they embrace the new woke mindset of the Pentagon. That may or may not be true, but it might explain why we're hearing military leadership talking in ways we've never heard before. General Mark Milley is the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and apparently believes our biggest enemy isn't overseas but right here within the military. He promised to root out white supremacy within the ranks and wants to understand white rage by reading more about critical race theory. The withdrawal from Afghanistan has been a disaster, even if the White House and some in the media try to put a positive face on it. Yet on the day when 13 service members died, what was the communication from the military? Sergeant Major of the Army Michael Grinson sent out a tweet reminding Americans that diversity is our strength. This virtue signaling was the military's effort to commemorate Women's Equality Day. By contrast, a Marine lieutenant colonel was relieved of his command for his video criticizing military leaders for the Afghanistan withdrawal. That would be some of the same top brass that constantly criticized former President Donald Trump for 4 years with impunity. General Michael Hayden compared Trump's border facilities to Nazi death camps, and more recently, the retired general retweeted a suggestion that unvaccinated Trump supporters should be put on planes back to Afghanistan. These are just a few unfortunate examples of the type of military leadership we have today. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Go deeper on topics like you just heard by visiting pointofview.net. That's pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Chelsey Youman with us today with the Human Coalition, and we're going to not only talk about the heartbeat bill in the state of Texas, which is now the law, but also the challenge to Roe versus Wade in Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization, which is one of the things that will be considered by the Supreme Court. And I'll hold up right now one of the booklets that we make available, Chelsey, on abortion, and in there we obviously spend some time talking about biblical arguments against abortion, and there are about a half a dozen we have there, but then we move to what I call medical arguments against abortion. Some of those have to do with genetics, but one of those very powerful arguments has to do with the fact that if you used the cessation of heartbeat to define death, could you not use the onset of heartbeat to define life? And that, I think, has been something that really appeals to the common sense of a lot of individuals that maybe have never thought about this before, because it's the issue of heartbeat. Now, in your article, you also point out the fact that then, of course, those that are pro-abortion, pro-choice, they try to muddy it by saying, well, yeah, but the heart isn't completely formed, the brain isn't completely formed, the liver isn't completely formed, but of course nothing is completely, matter of fact, the brain isn't completely formed when they're born. You got 3 boys, you know that the brain's still developing in your household, right? So I'm always amazed that they use that argument, because it's not a very powerful argument, I don't think.
No, actually, this would be great for our listeners to know, is that science is really on the side of the pro-life movement, especially as science has developed so significantly on the point of life. They used to say in Casey versus Planned Parenthood, the big decision that upheld Roe the first time, they said, well, that's really, when life begins is really a religious or moral question, and I don't think that's true. I think now It's really a scientific question, and 96% of biologists in a study agree all 7 factors that exhibit life, all 7 are complete at conception. That's things like the ability to metabolize, cells' ability to grow and develop and form. There's a whole host of standards biologists have when it comes to what is life and what is not, and that's all present at conception in the womb. So for me, I start there and say it's really a scientific question. But of course, we have religious and moral obligations to assign the value of humanity in that, right? Human life exists at conception. And then it's a question of society deciding how much do we value humanity.
And again, one of the things that you point out is there's always an attempt to kind of muddy the waters, but whether you look at the fact that the developing embryo, fetus, and baby is genetically distinct from the mother, that you have heartbeat, later on you have brainwave activity and all of that, those are really kind of powerful arguments indeed. And I thought for just a minute I would slip in this piece that came out in World Magazine. I've known Marvin Olasky for decades, and the other day, John Stonestreet quoted from it, in which I thought it was very interesting that when you go back and even look at the Greeks, Hippocrates, we have the Hippocratic Oath, and his followers began to wonder about, since they had seen some of these miscarriages, they started seeing that when limbs and organs were formed and things like that, and many of them started to believe that life began after 6 weeks of pregnancy. And then you have Aristotle looking at some of those ideas as well. Now, again, we as Christians, and I think even from a genetic point of view, know that life begins at the moment of conception. But isn't it interesting that here, even back in the time of the Greek philosophers, when they did not have microscopes, they did not have embryology, they did not have ultrasound, even they were recognizing that about the 6th week, we're going to have to call these individuals human beings, persons. And so I wanted to roll that in there because it was, I think, another rather intriguing illustration of why this 6-week particular cutoff even makes sense from the philosophy of the Greeks going back 2 millennia.
Of course. And we hope as Christians that we eventually, especially if Dobbs is overturned, can stop abortion at conception. But, at this phase, with the way the courts go, they're really looking for scientific signs of life, and a heartbeat in a child is an obvious scientific sign of life.
And again, it seems to me that that would be a very compelling argument because, again, most of our listeners, unlike you, have never maybe read the Supreme Court decision. But the original statements that I thought were most intriguing are, we need not resolve the difficult question of when life begins, when those trained in the respective disciplines of medicine, philosophy, and theology are unable to arrive at any consensus. The judiciary at this point in the development of man's knowledge is not in a position to speculate as to an answer. Now, I've pointed out in other commentaries and even in my Christian ethics book that you look at all the statements being made by the United Nations and all the various statements made by doctors even at the time. I think it's really kind of deceptive to say that we hadn't come to any kind of conclusion about when life begins, because we know when life begins. But it seems to me, let's go back to this legal principle for just a minute. If indeed you say the Supreme Court back in 1973 didn't know as much about embryology and fetology, we know a lot more now. Couldn't that be a compelling argument for changing the decisions on Roe versus Wade?
Absolutely, Kerby, because the courts have held, in order to overturn a precedent, development in science, law, and fact have to be taken into account. And so when we look at the development of the child in the womb, what we know now about DNA and chromosomes and everything that's present at conception, it's really a different question now than was presented at the time. Not to mention society has changed. We have pregnancy non-discrimination laws on the books. We have sex non-discrimination laws on the books. Birth control, this is controversial, but it is widely available and affordable. Those are all facts that have been pled before the Supreme Court, and I hope they will consider.
One of the other questions that could have been asked in 1973 and probably would be asked if indeed there is any kind of serious emphasis on trying to overturn Roe versus Wade is, well, what would abortion-minded women do? And first of all, from what I'm hearing, abortion-minded women in the state of Texas right now, because of this law, are going to pregnancy resource centers, and some of these pregnancy resource centers are busier than they've ever been before. So it seems to me that if somebody were to say, if we don't legalize abortion, or if we don't strike down laws in abortion back in 1973, where would they go? The answer now would be that we have, I think the number I looked at the other day is 3 times as many pregnancy resource centers, pro-life centers in America as we have abortion clinics. What about that?
That's so true. And in Texas, it's 8 times. There's 200 of pregnancy resource centers that stand ready to help women. They're nonprofits. They don't make a profit on the woman, unlike the abortion industry. There's 24 clinics in Texas who provide abortion. And so I always say this isn't 1973. Our society is different. We have infrastructure in place to help women. Women know their options more than ever now. And, one thing I always say, too, is that women in our clinics at Human Coalition, they're actively seeking abortion. They come into our clinics, and they're not saying, I care about bodily autonomy. I am woman, hear me roar. They're saying, I need help. I can't feed the kids I have. I need a job. These are desperate women who 75% say they would prefer to parent if their circumstances were different.
Well, let's take a break, and when we come back, I want to take some phone calls because we would love to hear from you, 1-800-351-1212. But most importantly, I want to come back to this issue, which I put on the table, because there's a very good piece. Texas spends $100 million to help pregnant moms while it protects babies from abortion. And this particular article quotes from Chelsey, in which you said, while today we are hopeful for the thousands of babies whose lives will be saved, we are also hopeful for their mothers. Texas has spent decades creating a vast support system for pregnant women for this very day. And then this particular article has some great links to various groups like CareNet, Loveline, Let Them Live, much, much more. So we're going to talk about that. And we would love to hear from some of you that maybe are on the front lines for the pro-life movement. Perhaps you have actually testified on some of these heartbeat bills. Maybe you actually work at a pregnancy resource center. Maybe you have actually protested and picketed outside of an abortion clinic. Those would be some great conversations to have with you. And we'll also kind of look ahead to what the Supreme Court might indeed be able to do or might consider doing in Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization. So those are a few things we want to put on the table. And most importantly, we want to give you a chance to join the conversation today with Chelsey. She's our expert, of course, but we would certainly love to hear your stories and anecdotes as well. So 1-800-351-1212. Also, one other article we have posted I have yet to talk about. The Department of Justice asked a federal judge to block the Texas heartbeat law. What are the chances of that? And again, how that all plays itself out in the federal judiciary. So we have a lot more to cover, but we'd also love to hear from you. 1-800-351-1212. We'll be back right after this.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View radio talk show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @Point of View RTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, @Point of View RTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. the Point of View radio talk show. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Chelsey with us, and let's take some phone calls along the way as we get into some other aspects of the heartbeat bill and, of course, this case before the Supreme Court. We'll go out to California. Lee, thank you for joining the conversation today. I think you have a testimony.
Yes, hi. It was interesting. I was listening to the lady before the break about how, some people just really need help and and all of that, and that's why they don't want to have the baby. Well, when I was young, I made a mistake, had unprotected sex, got pregnant. To my surprise, I don't know why, I should have known, and I did have an abortion. I had it because I thought I was doing the right thing to protect the other people involved, the other families involved.
Yes. But
now I am grown, married, have a wonderful child who's 29 today, and regret that I did that and missed that baby.
Wow.
And so I'm not for abortions, but I just thought that maybe someone would like to hear that. Here's somebody who's been on both sides of that.
You certainly have, and I appreciate you sharing that, first of all. Happy birthday, and again, there is a sense, let me, if I can, Chelsey, come to you for just a minute. I know this isn't necessarily the ministry you always do there at Human Coalition, but I found that when you go to various pregnancy resource centers, and I've spoken at quite a number of those banquets, you hear quite a bit about reaching out to women who have been exploited by abortion, and I know you're familiar with some of the ministry that has existed in that regard.
Absolutely. Unfortunately, it's so true. I mean, I think one statistic I know is that 60% of women who have abortions feel coerced. They feel pressured, whether that's by their partner, a family member, a friend. They feel pressured into this scenario. And so many of our clients, one, for example, she was living in her car with her 17-year-old and found out she was pregnant, and she thought she had no other choice. How was she going to bring a baby into that broken scenario? But instead, groups like Human Coalition and other organizations like ours come alongside her. We helped her get a job, taught her how to save money. She was in her own home within 2 years, and we were with her every step along the way. And I think that's just so important for us to understand who these women are. It's not who the left portrays them to be. It's not who abortion providers say they are. They are not a bunch of feminists who just want to make their own decisions. A lot of them are just need help.
And again, that gets us to, before I take another phone call, this very good piece on how Texas spends $100 million each year to help pregnant moms while it protects babies from abortion. That money, you might wonder, well, where does it go? Well, go to pregnancy centers, adoption agencies, maternity homes. And of course, that is just a small amount because, Chelsey, talk about this, because I'm very familiar with the fact that when you look at all the other donations that don't even go through government coffers, all the sweat equity that so many pro-life people spend, there are solutions and options and hope for women who are convinced that the only answer to their, quote, problem pregnancy is abortion.
Yes, I think you hit the nail on the head, Kerby. So there's public resources available, especially in states like Texas. But then there's private resources and churches and charities that come alongside. Now, this might surprise you, Kerby, but pro-life giving is actually one of the lowest charitable donations out of all the causes. And that always surprises me. I think it's less than 0.001% of all charitable giving goes to organizations that serve women. And I'd love to see that change. But ultimately, I kind of believe if the church is the church and we are good neighbors to one another, we're going to come alongside these women who are naturally in our paths. 1 in 4 women will have an abortion in America. That's a lot of women you run into every day who that's a part of their past or they're considering it now. And so just to be sensitive to that and understand, we need to engage with women around us to help prevent them from having abortion.
Well, there's your action item for today, and that is, I would agree with what Chelsey has to say. Having spoken at quite a number of pregnancy resource center banquets, they almost always are overworked and underfunded. So it seems to me that one of the action items I want to suggest for you today is to go and find a pro-life operation. It could be a clinic, a maternity home, adoption center, something of that nature that you could actually support. And so let's take some more phone calls because, of course, as you might imagine, we have quite a number of people that would like to share their testimony. So we'll go now to the state of Georgia. John, what would you like to add to our conversation today?
Well, good morning or afternoon. Thank you for taking the call. I'm sitting on a tractor in a rainstorm in an air-conditioned cab, but I'm loving your program. And as I told your screener, I'm a 74-year-old granddad with 12 grandchildren and Southern Baptist, and a few years ago I was nudged, I think, spiritually to to find out more about the pro-life versus the pro-choice so-called argument. And I think you guys are right on target to where I landed, which is abortions kill babies. And my belief, I started to say perception, but my belief is that there are so many folks, some in my extended family, some in my community, that are numb to the whole issue of pro-life, pro-choice. They think in those terms rather than what is actually happening, which is the taking of a life in the process of abortion. About a year and a half ago, I self-published a book. The title is, "Oh My God, We Are Killing Babies. Society Has Two Choices. The baby lives or the baby dies." I sent a copy of that to all 100 senators, got back 3 responses. And one response was very positive from a Republican senator out west. My senators did not respond. 2 Democrat senators, one of whom is now vice president, sent the book back saying they couldn't accept a gift of a $10 humble book such as what I sent. My point is, or the message that I wanted to say is first that you guys are on target and getting people involved with supporting their pregnancy centers. We have a couple in our within a 50-mile radius of the tractor that I'm sitting on, and get people to those clinics that are biased towards, as they will admit, to inform the lady about what it is that is happening, and then to give her love and choices and Christian counseling, hopefully to save that baby and to solve some of the problems that brought them to that clinic in the first place.
Well, first of all, I'd love to see your book, and of course, we would certainly be able to give people more information about that. So, John, first of all, thank you for joining us, and thank you for stopping long enough in your tractor to give us a call. That just encourages me greatly.
Well, you encourage me often. I listen to Point of View all the time. I have to turn up the radio sometime to hear it, but you're always on target with really good messages, and I appreciate your taking the call. And to your guest, I love you, and I pray that God blesses you with a lot of success in what you're doing.
Wonderful. Well, again, that's part of it, Chelsey. Some people might, like John might say, well, I want to publish a booklet or something like that. Some people might say, well, I might want to write to my legislature, or I might want to work on the next campaign to make sure that people with pro-life convictions serve in the legislature or in Congress. Others might work at a pregnancy resource center. There's a place for everyone to be involved, isn't there?
There absolutely is. I love just hearing how passionate he is, what an activist he is. It's really not hard to get involved. There's so much work that needs to be done. You know, I was reading the Bible yesterday and it was saying the workers are few. The harvest is plentiful, but become a worker. That's what I always encourage everyone to do, is just find a way that fits, where you become a worker.
Let's help people, just before we take a break, figure out how to connect. First of all, of course, we have the link to Human Coalition if they'd like to know some more. We have, of course, information that people can find about CareNet or Loveline or a number of others. I think the first step is for some individuals that may be listening saying, I'm not even sure we have a pro-life clinic in our community here, a pregnancy center. So that's the first step, is to find one. And if one does not exist, maybe go to your pastor and say, maybe it's time for us to start one. So what will they find when they land on your website there at Human Coalition?
Yeah, so if you go to humancoalition.org, you'll find more about our ministry to women. We have a nationwide network of clinics serving women day in and day out. And we also have telehealth clinics where they call in, which turns out millennials love talking on the phone over in person. So that's been highly successful. or you could go to hucoaction.org. If you care about the advocacy side and the law and the politics and really wanting to see heartbeat bills passed in other states, that would be my advocacy arm at hucoaction.org.
Well, let's take a break, and when we come back, federal government's weighing in. First of all, they want to file a lawsuit against this particular case, and of course, the Supreme Court considering a case. We'll talk about that with Chelsey right after these important messages.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
For a few more minutes, and we'll take another phone call if we can. Chelsey with us. And Chelsey, I thought we might look first of all at the heartbeat bill. I think the argument being made right now by the current Attorney General trying to find a judge to strike down the law is a little bit of a fool's errand. But nevertheless, never underestimate the possibility of some federal judge to find some creative way to pull it down. So that's one issue I wanted to put on the table. But the bigger issue on the horizon is this pro-life bill out of Mississippi. And up until now, I think a lot of us have said, oh, we've been here before. Back in 1992, we mentioned Casey versus Planned Parenthood, and the court just kind of reaffirmed the 1973 abortion decision, maybe modified it a little bit. In 2020, Supreme Court had various justices appointed by two pro-life Republican presidents. They didn't really change the abortion law. But there's some people starting to think that this time might be different. So help us out with what could happen at the federal level right now.
Yes, there's so much to talk about at the federal level. I mean, first to start with the United States versus Texas case, I think it's just so noteworthy because the Biden administration filed a lawsuit against the state of Texas and is asking every citizen in Texas to be enjoined from being able to bring a lawsuit. So it's almost like they're wanting to stop citizens from enacting this at all. It's never been done before, and that it's just such an infringement on our rights as citizens of Texas or the United States in general. They also wanted to enjoin the entire state judiciary, which I've never seen before. By the way, none of us are parties to the suit, which it's an uphill battle. But I wanted to acknowledge that because I think the Biden administration is showing a commitment against rule of law. I mean, he doesn't care about separation of powers. He doesn't care about federalism, but he does care about this made-up right to abortion that's not even in the Constitution. So that's noteworthy for that reason.
And again, those, I think, illustrate just the fact that there have been people almost kind of losing their minds about this, now saying that we're going to not do any business with the state of Texas. One state saying we won't do any business with the state of Texas because they have a pro-life law, or ads coming out now encouraging people to leave the state of Texas to go to Illinois or Chicago, or one I saw the other day, or California. Yeah, we'll see if that happens. But just this almost irrational way in which people have reacted, you see sort of that same irrationality, as you said, in terms of the lawsuits that are filed. But what do you think are the possibilities of some kind of action this time from the Supreme Court, which differs from what we have not seen in the past?
Well, I think the SB8, the Heartbeat Act lawsuits, they have yet to be seen. But again, the entire bill is created in a way that procedurally, it's going to be really difficult for the abortionists to win. I haven't seen a good argument yet. Of course, the Fifth Circuit is on our side, as is the Supreme Court. So I'm really hopeful for the Heartbeat Act. But in terms of Dobbs, which is a Mississippi case for the first time in 30 years, asking the court to overrule Roe outright. It's an incredible ask. I'm so grateful Mississippi did make the ask, and I'm really favorable on the Supreme Court with this one because this court has held, look, we haven't been asked directly in 30 years to do it. Until you ask, our hands are tied. And so the ask was finally made. I hope we have the votes on our side, and that would, of course, return the issue back to the states. It wouldn't outlaw abortion outright. Instead, it would go back to the states to enforce their pre-Roe laws. Over half the states outlawed abortion, but many of your New York, California, those liberal states, they're going to continue to get to have as much abortion as they advocate for.
Well, again, we will keep watching that, but let's take another phone call or two to talk about some practical aspects. So we'll go to Missouri this time. Jeanette, thank you for calling. You're on with Chelsey.
Hello. I'm wondering what we can do as U.S. citizens to increase the amount of children to be adopted instead of just foster caring, and the extent to be lowered so people don't feel they need to go out of the country to adopt children, because there's all these unwanted children, but there's people that really do want them.
Very good questions. And we have talked about adoption before, but Chelsey, that's another part of it. If you're against abortion, then you should be for various kinds of pregnancy outreach, and you should be for a more efficient set of adoption agencies. And I know you've been looking at that as well, haven't you?
Yes, she's so right. Actually, the number of couples and parents waiting to adopt on wait lists is very high, but children that are available for adoption is low. And so the hope being in an abortion-free country or an abortion-free state, all of those parents who want to be parents have children to love and adopt. That would really change the entire adoption network.
And so, again, we may actually do another program on adoption. We've done that before. It's certainly an important issue. But just before we run out of time, I wanted you maybe to address this issue of how we can create a culture of life. Because one of the things we say on this program so often is that politics is sort of downstream from culture. And certainly we can change these laws. We can certainly see that providing alternatives to abortion and to really encouraging abortion-minded women not to abort their children are good, but some of that comes back to creating a culture of life, and I know that that's one of the things you've been trying to develop there at the Human Coalition. So can you give us some ideas on what we can do?
Yes, I mean, we obviously as Christians believe everything comes from love. And so like our earlier caller who wrote the book talked about, continue to talk about the humanity of the child in the womb and then the horrible reality of abortion, what it really is, deal with it on its terms. I think supporting nonprofits, volunteering at nonprofits, doing things like volunteering childcare. If you have time on your hands, use your time to help women. If you have money on your hands, use your money to help women. I think there's a place for everyone in the movement. But also just to say that it's going to take both. You don't end slavery by freeing one slave at a time, and you don't end the culture of slavery by outlawing it outright. You had to have both. People on the ground, in our case, serving women, creating a culture of life, but also don't neglect the political side of this as well, which is going to be necessary to end abortion.
So again, if people would like to know a little bit more, they can, of course, click on your picture, or they can go directly to humancoalition.org and find some of this. We have posted some of these articles today on why Planned Parenthood is wrong about the Texas heartbeat bill. We have one about Aristotle and abortion. I'd encourage some of you that are pro-life to look at that, because it's just another kind of interesting piece that we discovered from our good friend Marvin Olasky, writing that in World Magazine. Some other very important issues. And of course, humancoalition.org is a place to find that. And Chelsey, we look forward to the next opportunity where you sit in my chair and convene a Millennial Roundtable.
As do I, Kerby. Thanks for having me.
Well, again, we would encourage you to contact them, and we have all sorts of information about that on our website, which is pointofview.net, including my commentary on abortion on Monday. Now, let me just give you an overview of tomorrow. We'll have Janice Rosser-Allen on for just a little bit talking about a women's initiative, but mostly we're going to focus all of our time and attention on the second hour. That will be at 2 o'clock Central, of course, whenever you hear it on your particular radio station. And this will be with our good friend Joel Rosenberg. New book out, Enemies and Allies. I've already looked at all 360 pages. Incredible material, great stories, and real encouragement. A nonfiction book, but I might also give you an advance warning that we are going to make available some of Joel Rosenberg's previous books, because we have quite a number of those, some of the fiction books. So we'll be making those available to you as well. And of course, now that the book Enemies and Allies is out, we wanted you to know about that. So lots of great resources that will be available on Thursday. And then on Friday, our weekend edition, Penedexter Kelly Shackelford will be with us. So you should be able to find that information on our website. You should be able to find everything we've talked about today on our website. Most importantly, I want to thank Andrew and Steve for their help behind the scenes. We look forward to seeing you tomorrow right here on Point of View.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/sign-up. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/sign-up. pointofview.net/sign-up. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.